Once you learn to remain calm under the stressful circumstances of a fight, you will have no trouble remaining calm under the stressful circumstances of life. Huron Gracie said that, Chris. That kind of summarizes the first part of our show, huh?
Welcome to another edition of Through a Therapist's Eyes. What better opening than that? Craig Graves and Chris Gazik is with you, where we invite you to see the world through the lens of a real mental health and substance abuse therapist. To create emotional growth is our goal. And we remind you this is not the delivery of therapy services in any way. And we are looking for feedback, comments, discussions back and forth on throughatherapist'seyes.com or any of the social media platforms where we are happy to bring Through a Therapist's Eyes to you. Craig, the human emotional experience, what do you think we should do with that?
I think we should figure it out together.
I like it. I like it. I like it. So, hey, man, what's your fun fact thing here, man? What are we going to know about you? It's got to be something about on the mat, because we have Mr. Shawn McGinnis, who's so kindly spending extra time with us to get some more stuff out on here. I don't know. I don't want to do it for you, but I want to hear about something on the mat, man. What's maybe I'll help you out unless you got something totally different. What's the funnest time you had on the mat?
The funnest time I've had on the mat. I don't know. I think a couple weeks ago I had a pretty good day during our open mat session.
Yeah.
Things kind of started to click a little bit, and I think I had a pretty good day. Up until the last guy who tapped me like 10 times in 5 minutes. But up until then, it was great.
That's great.
The highest of highs and the lowest of lows.
That's
can
right.
all happen within 5 minutes.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Well, Mr. McGinnis, why don't you start us out again with where people can find you a little bit, maybe. I'd like to know, give you an opportunity, or you can say nothing if you want. That's fine, too, because I did that with somebody one time. They're like, nope, nothing. I'm like, remember David?
Yeah.
I was like, he's like, nothing, no,
Yeah.
no self-promotion. I'm like, that's fine.
Sure. You can find me on Facebook, Shawn McGinnis on Facebook. Have a Instagram page, Shawn McGinnis on Instagram. We have McGinnis Academy of Martial Arts.com, which is our academy website. We have McGinnis Academy of Martial Arts Facebook page. We have a McGinnis Academy of Martial Arts Instagram page. So you can find me on any of those social media outlets.
Yeah, I just appreciate what you're doing in your school. And now that's located, you want to say where it's located at?
Sure. It's 5106 Unit A, Wilkinson Boulevard in Gastonia, right near the Cramerton-McAdenville intersection.
And for those across the country, that is next to the Charlotte, North Carolina area. So for people that are local, man, I hope they really do kind of check where you're at and what you're doing and, that sort of thing. Because it sounds like you're doing, I don't know, I'm not an expert by any measure, but dude, it sounds like you're doing above average job for schools.
Well, I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean that as a compliment. Just picking on to what you're talking about with the, the emotions and everything that you're very aware of and astute to. I mean, that just impressed me from part one. And let me just give you a summary. Like, from part one, we took a break and our minds are sort of, settled down, and let's kind of build back up. I mean, what did we hit? Maybe Craig, what do you remember as a highlight, as just way of kind of reviewing and launching into where we want to go? Either of you guys.
If you want me to start it out, I would just say,
Sure.
I think in summary, there's just, a lot of application in martial arts and in life in general. I mean, there's emotional growth going on there, and there's, we talked about busting down the ego and building people up who needed to be built up, and that's kind of where that quote I read there in the beginning is kind of
cool quote by the way.
I think that's kind of where I would or what I would say about the first show if I was just kind of putting it in a nutshell.
Cool.
Anything to add there, Shawn, you think?
No, I don't think so. I think that sums it up pretty good.
Well, let's go into what we were kind of I think last show. Oh, and I have a question. Oh, I'm glad it came back to me. Yeah. No, have you ever done any MMA fighting? You meet these people, you go to shows or fighting,
No.
presentation. How do you feel about all that? Being an instructor and being so super experienced as you clearly are. I guess I'll vouch for that from part one. I don't know if we need to go through all that again, but dude, your experience is off the charts.
I've never competed in any type of MMA. One of the things I would always joke with when I would be training at other academies, whenever I was doing some of my training while I was teaching and going through my jiu-jitsu training, occasionally I would be on the mats and people wouldn't know what my profession was. They wouldn't know I was a police officer, or even the ones that maybe did know I was a police officer. I would, at different times, I would be around younger students in their 20s or 30s, and it's such a overwhelming desire to tell you about that they were going to fight MMA and talk about what they were planning on doing and how sucked into MMA people are. And I remember a conversation I had with a young student. He was, I think, 21 one time, that we were training over at the Jiu-Jitsu Academy I was training out in Charlotte. And this was probably about, seems like only a year ago, but unfortunately it's probably 5 or 6 years ago. I think I was a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at the time. And he asked me one morning during our training session, he asked me really seriously, like, I'm interested in doing MMA, and do you ever do any MMA? And so I sat there and I was like, well, I'm gonna kind of mess with this kid a little bit. And I said, yeah, I have done. I've probably had maybe 15 to 20 MMA fights. And he's like, really? And he's like, who was the toughest person? What style was the toughest person that you ever had to fight? And I was like, well, I said, probably the toughest opponent that I ever had a beer bottle in his hand, and tried to hit me with this beer bottle. And he just froze for a moment, and he moved on to another partner and never asked me another word. So I don't know if he got it that so many people, MMA has done what I tell people. It's done the best thing in the world for martial arts and the worst thing in the world for martial arts. The things that I traditionally held sacred in martial arts was the respect, the honor, the loyalty, a lot of those aspects that you're taught in traditional martial arts schools. And so much of that has been lost in MMA because you have all the trash talking and the people, the way their attitudes are. And so much of that is foreign to the way that I learned and trained in traditional martial arts. But it also, on the other hand, has brought a whole new world of students into martial arts academies that never would be, especially for young girls. With Ronda Rousey, has brought an influx of young females to train, which is one of the greatest populations that need to get in there and train. So it has done.
Why would you say that?
Just because typically, and going into what you do, typically the way that females had always been raised, and I do a lot of sorority self-defense seminars and women's self-defense seminars. So females had always typically been steered toward more passive and being ladylike and depending on a male for their protection and all those things that come from these traditional stereotypes. But yet they need to, in modern times, they can train and need to be more adept at being able to protect themselves in self-defense situations, especially with the way things are now. Females don't get married till later in life, or they may not get married at all. Just the social culture of relationships and having a man there to protect you is not the way our society is now.
Craig, I hear a lot of women in my head in our audience might be screaming out there in their cars like, I don't need no man.
Right, exactly.
I think that's what he's saying.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and that's what I tell them. You don't need anybody to protect yourself. You can. And martial arts is not based off size and strength, and it is based off technique. And so you don't need someone else. All you have to do is get in and train yourself. Martial arts was designed for small people to be able to beat big people. And women
That's a statement.
right. And women, typically, this has always been my experience as far as training. I was having this conversation with this parent before I came over here tonight. Females typically will pick martial arts up faster than men will because of the things that you're typically we're used to doing that develop things that you need in martial arts. Balance, rhythm, and flexibility are key components that are going to help you progress faster in martial arts. And males typically aren't doing activities that promote those assets that you're going to need to progress faster in martial arts. So typically females are going to progress faster and do well.
Crap, Craig, I have no rhythm, man. I would
I
suck
know,
at this.
Yeah, you're
so,
in trouble.
Females do terrific in martial arts, and it's such an awesome opportunity for them to get in and learn to be self-sufficient and not feel like that they have to look to someone else, no matter who it is, for their own self-protection. Take control of the situation yourself and learn to defend yourself. So it's a great opportunity, and we get so many young girls, really young. I'm talking from age 5 all the way up to adult females that come in because they saw Ronda Rousey was the first strong female that they saw in martial arts, and they saw it on an MMA fight, and they come in and they're like, I want to learn martial arts. I saw Ronda Rousey and I want to be like her. Because they see this strong,
confident
female.
secure,
and
grounded, yeah.
Right, exactly. Now there's other aspects of the role of that you wouldn't want to emulate, but those aspects of it are great aspects for young females to come in and gain from martial arts. And that's what martial arts has to offer people, whether it's a female or a male.
Yeah.
That is hard to get in going to a gym and lifting weights, or going and running on a treadmill, or going to do any other activity. Martial arts is going to build your mind and your body.
It is. There's so many benefits physically and mentally. It's
Yes,
a
sir.
total body workout. It's funny you say some of that stuff because my daughter just a couple of days ago was telling me her hero was Holly Holm.
Right.
You know.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and she trains martial arts and she's pretty good at it. And
She knocked Ronda Rousey out.
yeah, right. She
Not
did.
your daughter.
Yeah, not my daughter, but she says she's going to grow up to be a UFC fighter.
And
you
she
know.
did that to you?
Yeah, and she's
Oh,
11,
wow.
right? You know,
Right.
so she might change her mind before she gets to that point. But it freaks her mother and my mom out, and they're like, "Don't you encourage her to do that?" And I tell them, I'm not standing in her way. If that's what if she grows up and wants to do that, then I think that we should let our kids do what they aspire to do instead of encouraging them to do things that we or society thinks the right thing for them to do.
Right.
But to your point, you know, she trains and she's good and she's, you know, Holly Holm's her hero, you know,
Can't get any
or so
better
she
than that.
says. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, let's go into some of the emotional things. I think we missed a couple things that we wanted to hit, and I think that'll naturally lead into, as we said in part 2 here. I'm super excited to kind of jump into some of the policing specifically.
Sure.
I hesitated there because when we talked about it before, we really talked about it a lot from a first responder perspective and dealing with trauma and all of that. But I mean, I was really kind of surprised at your extensive police history that I would refer the listener to your introduction there in part 1, because I really feel passionate about the emotional characteristics of what's happening in our country's awareness around, you know, the country's mass murdering events and violent actions and policing and a lot of the pushback that's going with policing and just the dynamic emotional things that are going on with all of that. And I really want to tap your brain with the extensive police history that you have. But before we get to all that, then we were talking about injuries, and I was fascinated how you were talking about when a martial artist gets injured, and that just screamed to me grief and loss. I'm sure the listening audience is like, grief and loss with an injury, but like, yeah, that was pretty neat what you were talking about.
Right, and what I was referring to, and it's with a high-profile athlete. Really, you can use Andrew Luck, the football player who just recently retired.
Yeah.
And what I took from that, he was in this cycle of injury rehab, injury rehab, and the toll it was taking on him mentally.
And just real quick for our audience, because that is an awesome example. You're right. Andrew Luck is a quarterback for the Indianapolis Colts in the NFL, and he was come out coveted as a young quarterback. And man, he did pretty good. He's had a pretty good career and everything, right? Would you say? You know, and but he's just you know, when he made that announcement, I heard sports, you know, casters talking about, well, was Andrew Luck a bust? You know, was he a busted draft pick? Did he because he didn't really accomplish, you know, Super Bowl win or this type of thing? And dude, this guy's an amazing quarterback.
Sure. He, I believe, was only in the league maybe 4 to 6 years. Craig,
I think 6. Right? I think 6 years.
Was it only 6 years?
6-year career. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And so very short for.
Of course, the average NFL career is 3 years, right? Actually, but yeah.
And so when I listened to his press conference about why he left, and you could tell that it was just he talked about the emotional drain of going from injury to rehab to injury to rehab, and he was in this cycle where he would get hurt, then have to rehab and go through that mental thing of getting yourself back in shape and then getting on the field and getting hurt. And so martial artists, one of the things that martial artists deal with is as they continue to train, one of the things I've always been fascinated with, and I've dealt with it at times myself from training for as long as I have, as you begin to, over the years, see your body as your weapon. And so when you have an injury to your body, you feel like that you're compromised as far as your effectiveness to be able to defend yourself in a hand-to-hand altercation. So you really become in tune with your body, mentally and physically. And so when a martial artist gets injured and they're not able to be 100%, it can be very psychological for them to deal with it while they're trying to recuperate from the injury and the time that they may have to take off training, or they may have to train in a limited capacity. And so it wears on. They become hyper aware of that injury, and they just see themselves as vulnerable, and they take that away from them outside the martial arts academy, even though the average person may not be able to tell that the person's injured. But in the martial artist's head, they look at the world so differently when they're out in society that they feel like everybody knows that they have an injury and they're not 100% and that they're vulnerable.
Yeah.
So it's a very psychological battle that martial artists go through when they're injured.
You know, it just I hear you talking a lot about, just talking to you tonight. The word vulnerability. Vulnerability comes up a lot in the experience, I guess, of being physical. Even if you've got on top of your game and you're on top of the match, or feel confident in your physical abilities or whatever, boy, that vulnerability can just pop back almost, it seems like. Is that you know what I mean?
Yes.
It goes up and down. I mean, it moves all around, doesn't it?
Very much so. And Craig gave a good analogy a few minutes ago prior to the break, I think, and he was talking about how one day or at the beginning of this session where he talked about how he had a great session last Saturday or the Saturday before an open mat, and he felt like things were clicking for him and he did really good. And so he was having this really extremely productive and feeling like he was making progress in the Jiu-Jitsu Academy that day. And then
suddenly,
you
didn't give him a front kick and put him on his
right,
butt, did you?
No. And so then immediately as he's feeling super elated and like he's doing great, then that very last round you run into somebody and they just humble you back down and they're able to submit you 5 times in a 5-minute round. And so now you went from that where you feel like you were doing super to immediately now you're just at this emotional level like, man, I really suck. And so it is I tell people all the time when they talk to me about quitting, I'll have students come to me and they're just like, I'm just doing terrible. I hadn't gotten any better for months. And I call this the grind of martial arts. People that are going to continue to train over periods of time, because martial arts is different.
Well, I'll tell you, just to jump in, that's also like the grind of life, really.
Right, it is.
It's almost a microcosm of the reality of what we're dealing with in our marriage, in our company, in our parenting, You know, I
Yes.
mean, right? Like that grind is a big deal for people.
Right. And I think, I'm sure me and Craig have talked about this, and I talk to it with students all the time, is the Martial Arts Academy is a small microcosm of life. A good friend of mine, Mr. Cosby, and Miss Craig brought up his
You
wife.
didn't say Cosby, did you?
Cosby, Causby.
Okay,
They're in
that's a
Cosby
different
Karate.
Cosby,
Right,
please, right?
Right, yeah, most definitely. And he always jokes and will tell the young students, everything you need to learn in life, you're going to learn on the mats. And it is very much a microcosm of life, because martial arts, what it takes to begin training, and then what it takes to continue training, because people think that black belt is the goal. Black belt is just a landmark. But martial arts is different than football and baseball and basketball and all these other sports that are seasonal. Martial arts doesn't have a season. It is nonstop. And what gets people is the day-to-day grind of doing the same thing for years and years and years and years, and whether or not you're mentally able to do it through injuries, through these long, what I call peaks, valleys, and plateaus, where you have these peaks where in the beginning you're just growing, you're getting better every day because you're just learning new stuff constantly. And then you'll hit this peak, and then suddenly things will flatten out, and you'll go through these plateaus, and sometimes your plateau may last a month, and sometimes it may last 4 or 5 months. And those are really tough
3 years.
Right. Yeah, they can last for long periods of time. And so the mental toughness that it takes to continue to go to the academy when you don't feel good, when you're injured, when all your friends are going out and doing fun stuff, and to make yourself go and continue to will yourself through it year after year to make yourself not only a better martial artist, but a better person, is tough. And that's why most people quit. That's why most people can't handle or can't just mentally deal with the day-to-day routine year in, year out to really affect that change in themselves. So, and that's why most people, you'll see people that quit early on, or they quit after a blue belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and tons of people quit after they get their black belt in martial arts.
Well, you know, I think we see that in the therapy world too. For therapists out there that are listening, right? Like, you know, the commitment to improving yourself in a therapy experience is very much like that too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, we have people in our field that teach like short-term solution-focused stuff. Now, all you solution-focused folks out there, don't email me and crash on me. I mean, it has its place, and it serves a good service to people. But I'm really bent much more on the process and the progression and the reality of a long-term commitment to yourself, whether you're in therapy for, you know, 4 years or 3 months. I mean, maybe you do 3 months and you stop, and you come back for 4 more months a year later, and then you stop and you come back for, you know, this is a process of self-improvement and self-awareness, right, and self-development that doesn't have like
it doesn't end. You continue. There is no end to self-mastery, right, and that's kind of what you're talking about,
right?
You know.
And to me, that's ultimately, without getting too Zen Buddhist on you, to me, that is the ultimate goal of a martial artist. George St. Pierre talks about it. The goal isn't a black belt. The goal is self-improvement every day. I want to be better than I was yesterday in all aspects of my life. It's about me. It's not about mastery over other people. It's about mastery over myself, and how I'm gonna lead my life. And most people never get that out of their martial arts training. I have people all the time, I get them to black belt or these high ranks, and they never really grasp that concept.
Really? Mm-hmm. Somebody that's gone through the ranks that long, and they didn't get...
Typically we'll have students that they're just looking at the goal for the belt.
Do you ever have people that join your groups and stuff and just have no interest in having the belts? I mean, they don't want belts. They say, nah,
everybody says that in the beginning.
Yeah.
I very rarely will have, occasionally you'll have a student that doesn't, but everybody comes in, and I think they feel like that's going to make you look at them and go, oh, I'm impressed with you that you're, everybody will come in. They're like, well, I'm not interested in belts. I just want to learn martial arts. I just want to look better. And then about 2 months in, when you start talking about promotions, you better believe how much they are all about getting a belt or a stripe. Oh yeah, it changes rapidly. Yep, because it's a sign of progress, and you've worked hard for it, and so now you want that goal. And so it does change, but it's very common. Now, kids, they always come in and they want a belt. But you get into your adults, and all the adults are like, oh, I'm not interested in belts. I just want to learn martial arts. I want to get better. And usually within 2 or 3 months, they're like all about getting promoted.
Okay.
Do you think that it sways one way or the other, Shawn, about that? About people who want to, I mean, of course, it's like you said, it's awesome to get a belt because it shows your dedication and hard work.
Right.
But do you think most people's mindsets are about progressing belt-wise or just getting better at the art?
I think that most people look at belt promotion. They look at the progression of the belts, and that's how they gauge. They think that gauges how, if they're getting better at the art. Typically what I will tell people, which is a sign that you have, just like earning a degree in something, you've stepped through these hoops and you're going to get that certificate. But I tell people all the time, they may get a promotion. I'm like, you earned that promotion 3 months ago. Today's when I actually was able to promote you and give it to you, but you actually earned that. You earned that with your skill level and the things that have changed back then.
Well, if I could just add to that, I mean, I know next to nothing about martial arts, so I'm not an expert in that, but I see human emotion and human experience in what I think is a fairly unique way. And so what your question to Shawn and your answer made me think about the folks out there. We have a lot of people listen or are dealing with substance abuse, and so in the 12-step programs, they do step work, right? You do step 1 through 12, and I remember very distinctly. I was very green, new to the field, and there was a guy that I was in AA meetings with and learning what that whole program was about and stuff years ago, and I knew of this guy from a rehab facility that we were also in tune in working with. So basically I saw him in rehab and then in 12-step meetings, and his sponsor was a therapist person that I was training with. All that is to say, the therapist person was the sponsor, and he actually had a conversation that I was able to witness with this AA member who thought he was on step 4, and he was being told, you're going back to step 1. Right?
Right.
And that was such a quote-unquote ego burst for him that he's like going backwards in steps. Like, what do you mean I'm brown belt going back to a blue belt? You can't do that. Like, it's not. It's an emotional process of trying to experience myself as better than I was and feeling like I'm not, but missing the point of that. Like you said, you're just growing. You're just trying to get better.
And once people really understand that, it's always good to get the belt rank, but once you see them make that transformation where they're just wanting to get better, you can tell.
And is that part of the goal?
It is.
Yeah.
You want them to. I never had any idea that the day that I started martial arts training that I would be still doing martial arts 30 years later. I just knew right then I was going to give a solution to a problem that I had, which was going to be able to make myself more capable at the job I was currently doing. And from the moment I took that first class, which sounds kind of cheesy, but I enjoyed it so much because I was learning something useful, and then I was growing mentally and growing physically. It sucked me in, and I've loved it ever since. I've read books. I like the psychology of it. I like the training. I like all of it. I think so.
And that's a good transition for us, if we could. Is that okay, Greg?
Yeah, I did have a question for the two of you, but we're already almost 30 minutes into the second thing. I've seen a couple of articles recently on jiu-jitsu pages that I follow, and the topic of the articles have been people using jiu-jitsu to treat depression. And what are you guys' thoughts on that? Why would jiu-jitsu be a And I know the obvious things like the physical, the dopamine release, probably the community, because the community, the jiu-jitsu is a big community. It's a big social thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, would it be, we were kind of kidding about Shawn, maybe not kidding, but talking about Shawn being a therapist, but people are actually using jiu-jitsu to treat their depression.
Well, I think there's a lot of things that goes into that, honestly. Yes, and anxiety and mental health. And honestly, it's just as I think, it was a part one maybe, Shawn, where you were talking about the raw emotions that are there. So, I mean, I think that whenever you're working on self-improvement and, better self-talk and confidence and those things I see over here on the social and emotional component, like those messages that you've learned about yourself. I mean, that gets challenged when you're on the mat. And if you've got you guiding somebody and developing with that, again, not just kids out there. Don't think this is just kids developing that. They're grown. You correct me if I'm wrong, sir, because I've not been on the mats, but I would throw a $10,000 bet down right here on the table that grown 40-year-old men are out there experiencing that raw emotion and going off onto, tears and things that they're processing inside, right?
Yes, most definitely. And it's
So
amazing.
do I get 10 grand there?
Yes, you do. So hopefully Craig's got it.
Right?
I'm just
that was good.
It is, and we have students that are in their 60s all the way down to students that are 5 years old, but you're going to tend to get a lot more of that emotion and those life experiences that people are dealing with that are going to come out on the mats because they are dealing with either something at work or something in their personal life, that's something that they're going through. I always tell people it's funny how much people depend on martial arts to get them through these life stressful situations. I've seen so many people through divorces and separations and children moving away from college and deaths of family members. And they tell me how much that having that community and being able to go in and have to be in the moment for 60 minutes and not think about other things and just be in that moment and totally be focused on what you're having to do mentally and physically, and then that physical release that they get afterwards. And that's when all that emotion comes out because they were able to let go for an hour.
Let go. That's a whole nother, man, that's really awesome. We really do. We need to transition a little bit to the police stuff. I want to get to first responders and police things. And I think I'm going to start it out by, do I want to do this? I think I'm going to do it. Really, I'm going to make an observation, Shawn, and I realize that I'm speaking to essentially a would you say a well-seasoned probation officer and police officer on multiple levels, both supervising, acting as, and learning about. I mean, is that a fair statement?
Yes, sir. I would consider myself obviously an expert in probation and parole. I had less experience as a police officer. I did 6 years in law enforcement, but the two cross over so much into the type of people that you're dealing with and the stressful situations that you're in. So I would definitely consider myself an expert in criminal justice field, I would probably say.
Okay. Because first of all, I want to say, man, Craig and I, when we did the first responder show and trauma and everything, I mean, I want to make sure to be very respectful of not only police officers, but recognizing what they do in an amazing, like you said it earlier, I think it was part one when you were talking about it, Shawn, like day to day, every day, these guys are doing an amazing service for us in our community. I mean, they protect and they serve. And part of what my passion in dealing with these things with trauma and particularly policing, because I actually have had, Shawn, I don't know if you picked up on it, but maybe we can partner in some project together in the future.
I'd love to.
Because I really want to develop a program that can help police officers be trained, because I'll make the statement again, I do not think that we are preparing our young men and women coming into the blue to deal with what they're facing.
Right, and there's a big social stigma to it too. If you reach out, you're seen as weak. If you're having trouble dealing with a situation.
So let's launch into this with this. I want to make this observation. I was kind of processing it in my brain if I wanted to do it, but I've decided to do it.
All right.
Because I'm talking to you tonight,
Mhm.
and I checked with you if you're an expert and how much experience you've had, and I feel like you have a good knowledge of policing and training and how that works, it seems. And my observation is that, there's kind of, without being Buddha about it, like you said before, like there's an aura, right? There feels like to me there's a very powerful emotional reality that is in place for very specifically more police officers than other first responders. And I think that's because of the life and death reality that they're facing on any given day, literally. And to back that up, like, there's a pretty known psychological study where they took just normal, Joes out in the public, and they made half of them security guards in a prison and half of people prisoners. You
I remember
that
that study, yes, sir.
Oh my gosh.
Yes,
It's
I
a
sure did.
powerful
From psychology class.
Holy cow.
Right.
They had to stop it because it was so overwhelmingly emotional. Guards started acting like guards and abusing people.
Yes, I remember that study
Right?
from college.
And prisoners started acting like criminals.
Right.
And because you were in that role and the cultural reality there. So that police emotional challenge seems to be a part of the way someone almost presents themselves, even in their personal life as well. I do not pick up on that at all with you tonight.
Right.
Like it seems like just not there. You know what I'm talking about?
I do.
And, okay, take it, because I feel like I took a risk there.
No, and that's one of the most common things that I will get when people meet me. They will be like, "You were a police officer? You don't act like a police officer." So I'm like, well, what do you feel like that police officers act like?
I did my best to
right,
describe that, right?
Sure, right. And so usually what I take from that is the officers that will kind of be more aggressive, more puff their chest out, be a little more stern. I don't know a good
I would
way.
say a guardedness.
Right, very much so.
Strong guardedness.
Right. And so that's what I always take that as. And I take it as a compliment, but it's just always too a good part of it came from the change that martial arts took over whenever I started martial arts training, and how it changed me and how I present myself. I never with martial arts training, it teaches you more to relax and to not feel so guarded, because you feel more in control of yourself and more in control of your emotions, and you're not going to be as easily manipulated by things that will draw people into verbal altercations and physical altercations as much as someone that what I always refer to as they're going to have to posture, right? Which is
constant posturing.
Right.
Yeah.
And it happens all the time in non-law enforcement too. You get in a room full of guys and people start posturing, and they may have absolutely no reason to be posturing, but it immediately almost starts, and people start posturing and trying to puff out their chest and feel like they're tougher than everybody else in the room.
Or defending. I mean,
Right.
Because I see it with military professionals as well when I'm dealing with PTSD. And I mean, dude, like trauma, I'm going to use a word to make the point. Like, I mean, trauma's a bitch. It
Right.
is seriously, it gets at people on a core level. And when you've got that every single day, and you're supposed to go home, like you said, and say, "Hey, honey, how was your day?" Like, how do you respond?
Right.
Is what I want people to kind of learn how,
And that's one of the things that why people always talk about how relaxed I am. And I always joke and say, well, I get to punch and choke people for a living. I was like, how much more relaxed do I need to be? I said, and typically, I said, tell people that kind of as a joke, but the training, I'm able to get out all of that energy and all of that negativity and on the mats, and when I'm training, whether it's punching targets or whether it's kicking targets or whether it's training with another person on the mat in jiu-jitsu. And so you get that release, you get that emotional release, and you get that physical release. So if you take a police officer who's been on shift for 12 hours and they've been through this emotional roller coaster of seeing these horrific acts of violence or these horrific acts of deprivation against a child or other people, and they're having to deal with that emotionally, and then they have no outlet for it. They go home at the end of the shift and they're just bottling all that up, and they don't do anything to release that emotion. That's got to go somewhere.
After day after day after day.
Right.
It's tough.
Right. And so if they don't have somewhere for that emotion to go and to be able to get that out emotionally, whether it's talking to somebody or whether it's doing something physical to get that out, then I think that's why there's such a high rate of alcoholism and depression and suicide that goes on with law enforcement officers, is because so many of them don't get involved in activities that are going to allow them to deal with that in a way that's going to be therapeutic for them or helpful, whether it's physically or mentally.
Yeah, and part of what I'd like to break down a veil with, sorry, Craig, I want to make this is breaking down the veil of the fact that they can't do that. I mean, there's a powerful like block and barrier to like, you know, allow myself as a police officer to say I need to do something. Like that's strong and scary that they just feel as though they can't do because they'll lose credibility or whatever.
Oh, sure. What we were talking about earlier, that vulnerability when you're putting yourself out there and saying, I need help with an issue, no matter what it is, whether it's an experience that you have or whether or not you're just having a tough time dealing with the day-to-day grind of what you're experiencing. And so if you to humble yourself or open yourself up for that is very tough in a profession that is typically type A personality. You handle it, you deal with it, and you move forward, charge ahead. And so a lot of people don't know how to deal with that, and they've never been given the tools on some level of how to deal with it physically or emotionally. And so it comes out in other ways.
Is there a way for people to, if I'm an officer and I have an issue, is there a way for me to see a therapist without my buddies knowing? Is there confidentiality kind of deal?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there is, and there's
an emotional block, Craig. I mean, there's EAP and
stuff.
Well,
I get the fact that some people
it's here in my own head.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh,
that's a powerful reality. It's in my own blocking mind. I don't need it. I'm fine. I don't see this aura that you talk about.
Yeah, I get that part of
Yeah.
it. I do get that part of it, but I also got the part about felt like it's maybe a peer pressure kind of issue. And I think some people are just wired. I think therapy's a great thing, but my 16-year-old son went through some stuff at school, and of course, me and his mother got divorced, and I'm like, hey man, you need to talk to somebody, and he's like, well, if I got anything going on, I'll just figure it out myself.
That's right.
And I want to have a show sometime. There's some Navy SEALs that I listen to, and they're all about therapy, man. They're like, and I'd like to have one of them on the show at some point, just try to break down some of the barriers behind people who need therapy being weak. If these SEALs are, arguably the baddest dudes on the planet.
I know, right? I don't
know.
Sean could take
they're going to therapists.
And
Sean says no. You hear?
And that's one of the, just like what you were saying, is that even I consider myself very open-minded as far as I've sat in on tons and tons of therapy sessions in my past jobs, and know tons of people that are psychologists and psychiatrists and have friends. And still, if you came up to me and said, hey, Sean, do you want to talk? I would probably pull back. And I'm a pretty open. I'm a pretty open. I like to think of myself as a pretty open-minded person, but still, I'm like, oh, no, let's don't get too personal,
right?
Because I don't want my crazy to come out.
I can tell you as a therapist, there's a whole therapist thing. Hey, I'm a therapist. I don't need therapy. No.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
It is a powerful blocking reality.
Right. I used to joke with my friend Ray that I was telling you about, and I would be like, oh, no, I don't want you up there walking around in my head. I do not want that. There's enough stuff going up in there. I don't want you to see.
There's a great fear
right.
of it.
Yeah, exactly. He might peel back something that I didn't realize was there.
I've told this story before on our show, but have I ever told you the story about my first therapy experience?
No.
Yeah, okay. So my wife and I were having troubles, my ex-wife now. And we went to see a therapist, and I'm like, oh yeah, he's gonna fix her right up, And I walked out of that thing thinking, golly, I got some stuff some craziness going on in my head, some stuff I got to work on, It was an eye opener for me.
So why did you get out of policing?
When?
Why?
Oh, why did I get out of it? I started running my martial arts academy. I actually went into and got a actual physical location. I was teaching out of my house to a select few students, and two students, me and Craig have both referenced them, Mr. Cosby and Master Stephanie Cosby, who run Cosby Karate in Denver, North Carolina, had reached out to me about beginning training in jiu-jitsu with me. And at the time, I was just getting promoted to black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I was teaching it, but I was teaching to students in my basement. And they reached out to me, and they would drive down from Denver and train with me at my house. And they heard about, as we became friends, all my black belt certifications and my background as an officer. And they were like, you really need to open a school. You really need to open a school. They really started hammering me and getting in my head. You need to do this for a living. You can make so much money. You have all these credentials, and you're a phenomenal instructor. You need to do this. And I had put that idea out of my mind years ago. I was going to finish up my career in law enforcement and do something else part-time after that. And they stayed in my head about that enough to where I started researching it, and I opened my academy part-time while I was still policing full-time, and my academy grew and grew until it became no longer cost-effective for me to be a police officer, where I was losing money by continuing to police. And I loved,
just got into something
right,
that you were more passionate for
right,
and whatnot.
And I loved police work. I worked for a great agency. I worked for the Gaston County Police Department. I worked for a great agency, great experience. I loved policing. And so it was a hard decision to make. Plus, I had always worked for the government. I was one of those child of 50s parents that government jobs were the best way to go, because you're going to have stability. You're going to always have a job. You're going to have a pension. You're going to have retirement. You're going to have 401k. And so
that was a big jump.
Right. And so to suddenly go, okay, I'm going to put myself out here, be on my own, and sell myself. And now I'm going to be responsible for paying my bills and not the government. It was it was scary. I was terrified. And I did it in steps. So it wasn't just this total leap of faith. I did it in progression, and it slowly grew and grew to where I was like, I've got to take this step if I'm going to do it. But still, the day that I completely quit, went off reserve and everything, I was terrified.
Yeah,
because I had a wife.
Felt that too, doing the practice and stuff. Yeah, it's scary.
Yeah. So,
let's jump into specifics there.
All right.
So with police training specifically, I've heard you speak tonight about a lot of the emotional things that you're seeing on the mat and working with people, and I've heard you talk about the peeling of the layers and the vulnerability that is involved in all that. I'm hearing you identify very easily what I tried to describe as like an aura or a non-verbal presentation that people can literally feel in the presence of people and all. My question is, what kind of training or what kind of protocols are really in place to really help our men and women in the policing sectors to cope with this? What really is done besides the EAP and the stuff that I'm kind of like, how do they in like police academies or I know we have some protocols with debriefing and days off after shooting events, or just what prepares them? How are they really prepared?
Unfortunately, I'm not going to know a lot about that. I say we'll probably have to edit that part. I apologize.
Well, that's okay. Why would you say you don't know?
Probably,
or what did you?
Probably obviously there's protocols in for situations where they're during a shooting, if an officer's involved in a shooting, and I don't want to misspeak here. So
and if we don't know, we don't
right,
know. I mean, that's fine. But
so, there are some basic protocols where they have to go through and meet with the psychologist until they are mentally cleared back for duty. They have to go through. They are taken off the road and taken out of work for I think 2 to 4 weeks. And obviously they are eligible to go to employee assistance and CSI till that psychologist they go through a debriefing, obviously with the department where it's an investigation, but then they meet with a psychologist, and until that psychologist clears them back to go back out on the road, they don't go back out.
Well, I guess what I'm saying, and I've been involved in some of that. I mean, I've done
Right.
some of those assessments and some of those things. So I mean, I've executed
Right.
that. So, but that's after, right?
Right.
That's
Right.
that's after a while. And so I'm wondering about like even just your own personal experience then. You know,
Right.
so when you're that probation officer, or then as you switched from being a PO to an officer and whatnot,
Right.
was there any? And what year was that too? So it might be very different, right? Do we know the
Sure.
preparation process?
Right. When I switched from a probation parole, there was really nothing in place for probation and parole that I remember when I first went into probation right out of college. And if there was, it was so gleaned over that I'd never remembered it.
You're just put there to do.
Right.
Okay.
And I was telling Craig about a little bit of the protocol that you go through to get hired as a probation officer. It's pretty similar to that of as a police officer. You do a personal history statement, and you go through and tell about all your background, where you were from, about your family, all these different things. You ever been convicted of a crime? Have you ever been charged with a crime, drug use, all these different things. And then you go through and you take the MMPI. So they put you through several different psychological things.
That's a psychological test that's done to see personality and diagnosis and whatnot. Yeah.
And then you go through board interviews. And so during this process, it's not necessarily, I don't think, anything that's done to
teach you to cope.
Right. It is done to see if you're going to make the cut. I was telling Craig, they're going to ask you the same question by 6 different people in 6 different ways in 6 different formats and see if you vary your answer in the least bit during this process. So that's really the only... so it almost builds you up to be defensive about psychological help on down the line, because you're like in the very beginning, I'm being taught to.
I'm being
all right,
screened.
I'm on guard. I'm on guard with you right now because, first you're giving me this personal history statement where you're wanting me to peel back all these layers of my personal life, which I get because you're going to be in a situation that an average person is.
It sounds like you're being interrogated.
Right, and you are being interrogated. When you go to when you go to be a police officer, it's even more so because you go through several different interviews, and these same questions are going to be brought up at each interview, and then you're going to do your personal history statement. Those same questions will be covered again. Then you do your polygraph. Those questions are going to be covered again. And
Talk about interrogator. Polygraph.
It is, right? And so if you talk about pulling in, it's built and designed almost from the beginning for you to close off more than it is. I guess not necessarily there. It's almost like you're forced to open up because they need to know the background.
Yeah, that works well.
Exactly, right? I guess that's the best way I could describe it, though, because you're having to give...
Forced to open
to get this job.
Oh,
obviously,
dear.
You're giving up a lot of things that I'm sure that you don't have to do when you go to work at a bank or when you go to work at another company. You're not having to expose parts of your personal life, but not like your...
And I'm sure like the FBI is even worse, or the CIA or that type of thing.
Right.
Let me just tell you, Shawn, when I ask that question, I guess obviously it's regular ignorant or naive of me is the way I feel right now. But let me try to explain that. Like, to me, from my perspective as a mental health therapist, who, by the way, has worked with military professionals and men and women in our blue and first responders. I mean, I cannot even begin to describe you how much of an honor it is for me to have had the several experiences. I will even say the many experiences of doing that. But I'm after the damage is done.
Right.
Repetitively, over and over and over again, with people that I suspect are completely not prepared. So when I'm asking you that question, I'm naively and sort of ignorantly coming at it from like, well, of course you guys sit down in the police academy and you have a psychology 101 and an emotion management class and, someone that's there preparing for you how to deal with your family and, what you do in parenting with your kids and how you manage the amygdala, and you've learned about dopamine bursts and I mean, clearly you're prepared to deal with this stuff, right? right?
Right. And we are in
That's where my brain is.
Right. And with law enforcement, when I went through BLET, you are more so. You do have sessions in class that are part of your us work on how to deal with stress and whether it's physical or emotional. And you do go through blocks of your training when you're going through the academy.
Okay, that's
Yes,
where
sir.
my brain is.
Yeah. And so you do go through that. And we probably touched on it a little bit in probation, but it was so long ago. But in police work, because the stress level and the things are at such a higher level than they were in probation and parole, you in the academy you do deal with those topics, and you do get some training in those topics. And how
would you
to
say enough, or like how would you characterize that?
Man, and that was 2011, so
yeah, right. Okay.
So it doesn't seem like long ago, but that was 8 years ago. Honestly, for me, I would never probably feel like that's enough. I think that you need to be given plenty of tools to deal with those situations and with the stress that's going to come along with it. But I don't think you can. At that time, you have no concept of what you're about to get into. I probably had a better concept than all the other cadets because I was coming in with 20 years of dealing with criminals prior to coming in. But the other cadets, they're right out of college or they're right out of the military, and they have no clue about the things that they're getting ready to see. I had already seen a lot of those things. I had seen infants die in people's hands. I had seen people who had been stabbed to death. I had seen human depravity with child molestation and those things. So I had already seen these kids and people that were right out of college or military. They have no idea of the things that they're about to start encountering. So when you're in those classes, they're just looking at that as another topic, like how to handle radio traffic or how to handle a speeding ticket. So that to them is just another part of the training because they really don't have a concept of how important that is going to be for their longevity in a law enforcement career to be able to handle and deal with those stresses. And that's usually what breaks people down.
Absolutely.
In the very beginning, we'll have the people that wash out of the academy, people that wash out after a year or two on the job. They hit one stressful event and they are done. We would have tons of officers that would quit after one stressful event. They're like, I wasn't prepared for that. I wasn't ready to deal with something like that. I don't want to have to deal with things like that. They see something that they never thought they'd see, and now they can't pull that memory back, and they're just like, I'm shutting down and I'm out of this profession. And that happens.
And I have a theory about there, not really a theory. I mean, what I see is that, when you remember that whole tale of two tapes, right? Mm-hmm. You got the biological component and you got the social and emotional component where your job details and whatever build this side up big time. Mm-hmm. That social and emotional was raging. There's like a lot. But when you are coming into that and you already are predisposed as having an anxiety condition, which we've talked about on the show, holy cow, like you're set up.
Me and Craig were talking about this, and this is one of to me, if you take it to the ultimate extreme, and one of the things that obviously you have to be willing to do in a law enforcement career is take another human being's life. You have to be willing at some point, if it comes down to it, to take another human being's life to save your life or the life of a third party. And to take on that role and that responsibility, and then somehow not having experienced that yet, say, I'll be able to emotionally deal with that afterwards. That is, no matter how tough you are, that's a lot that you really can't understand until you would have to be in that situation. So from the beginning, be willing to take on that sort of a role and be able to say in that moment, I can make that decision, to me, which is would be the ultimate emotional, stressful situation in your life, to be in a life and death struggle with another person and then end up having to take somebody's life and having to deal with that. I just don't think that most times when people go into that field have an idea I mean, I don't think you could, of what that would be like and what it's going to do to you
To a certain
afterwards.
extent, you can't, right?
Right.
Yeah,
It's,
and
'cause
that's
it's an emotional thing in the moment, and you can't replicate that before it happens.
Right.
And that's kind of what I was sitting here thinking, because you're saying you get involved after the incident, but what can you really do, man, to prepare somebody mentally to see some of the things you're talking about, or do some of the things that you're saying police officers have to do? I mean, what can you do up front to prepare somebody to have to take somebody's life, or to see a kid dying?
I got some ideas,
Yeah.
but how would you say?
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, I think you would have to me, really, you're just going to have to make sure that, obviously, that you're involved in doing things. You're involved in doing activities. And one of the biggest things that we talk about is making sure that you're doing activities outside of the realm of law enforcement, that you're doing things to get you out of that setting when you're away from work, that are going to give you stress relief, that are going to keep you mentally healthy. Go out and do things, be active physically, be active mentally, to keep your mind fresh. But honestly, other than those things, to like really deal with the psychological end of it, I don't know, other than just knowing, it sounds cornball, knowing a number to a therapist office would be my go-to plan. I mean, because how else do you prepare yourself mentally for an event?
Let me give you guys
right. That's what I'm thinking.
I think we've all you've been married, sir, right?
Yes, sir, I'm married.
Yeah, or still are. So I'll give you a metaphor, guys. Because I do have a lot of ideas about that. We won't do it on this show because we don't have time. But it's kind of like, I do a lot of marriage counseling, okay? And unfortunately, I do a lot of marriage counseling in the bottom of the ninth inning when we're down 7 runs. You got 2 outs and it's just a 1-3 count, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like what you,
right?
You know what I would love to be able to do a whole lot more of. You can take a guess.
Pre-marital problem
counseling.
Yeah.
Premarital counseling,
right. Or even pre-problem, right? I mean,
well, it's pre-problem.
You think things are going great? Just go in and get a checkup.
Yeah, right. Or
so you don't get in a hole.
Premarital or marital counseling right from the get-go. We talked about millennials, I think, at one point. You brought up the article, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
Remember? They're coming in earlier and they're getting help and whatnot a whole lot before you got layer after layer after layer built. And so I have a lot of ideas about that, but like I said, we can't.
Yeah, just for Shawn and the listener, the divorce rate among millennials is actually down.
Really?
They're bringing the divorce rate down.
Yeah,
they did.
Yeah.
Here to the millennials, they get crashed on, man.
Right. Along those lines, it was funny. I'm a huge. Me and Craig talk music all the time. I'm a huge rock fan, and not to go into another podcast, but Paul Stanley of Kiss was on the Joe Rogan podcast, and he talked, and Joe Rogan they were talking, and Paul Stanley said, I believe when he was 18 or 19 years old, when he first started Kiss, he was still living, I believe, home with his parents. I think he was 18, and he said on his own, he lived in New York, he felt like he needed to talk to somebody. He said, I wasn't necessarily going through anything horrific, but I felt like I just needed to talk to somebody. I take a bus to Manhattan, go in, make an appointment, see a therapist, talk to him. He said, I've been seeing therapists ever since.
Paul Stanley from
Yes,
Kiss?
And he said that the reason is
awesome.
We started Kiss, and he said,
Craig, get him on the show, man.
I know. He felt
Hook
like,
him up.
and I'm trying to make sure I'm not misquoting, but he said it felt like they were on the verge of getting big. And that he said, I'm an 18-year-old kid, and I have no way of being prepared for what's about to happen to me.
That is impressive.
It is crazy. And you think about that. And I think that's the situation that you're in when you go into law enforcement. I mean, I remember when you're sitting in there and you start seeing videos of officers getting shot in the line of duty, and these crazy graphic videos that you're shown of what can happen to you, but you still, in your brain, you're not thinking that could ever happen to you. You have to operate on that assumption to a certain extent, and to be able to do your job effectively. And so when you're in those and you're seeing those images and things, you're not at that time at all thinking about, hey, I need to set myself up so that in case this ever happens, I'm already on the front end of some mentally and physically traumatic event, and being able to be prepared for it if it does happen.
Yeah.
And so you're just not wired that way in that field, I don't think. And you may not be in any field, but I don't think that you're wired that way.
Well, you're more defensive because of the things you're defending yourself emotionally from. We need to wind down a little bit, but just so that's a warning for us. I don't want to lose the idea of what you were talking about with why police. I think it was before the mics came on tonight. Why police officers specifically? I think you said the statement. I don't want to misquote you either, but you can correct me because you're right
All
here.
right.
And I will very respectfully do that, sir.
All right.
Please do not get angry.
Right. I'm pretty laid back. Craig can
You are
tell
very.
He's probably never seen me really mad, except when I'm yelling in class, and that's usually more for show than actually me being mad.
So I think you said that police officers are rarely come in for training.
Right.
They don't come in for. I think you meant that specifically about martial arts, but I think you meant that also. I mean, they just don't get training.
Right. Typically, I think that law enforcement officers are really underrepresented in martial arts academies, and I feel like that there's several reasons because of that. And one of the biggest reasons that I feel that is because being in the field that you are, and you having to daily are dealing with people and putting your hands on people. So a law enforcement officer needs this training more than any other segment of society. They need to, because other than driving their vehicle and typing on a computer, they're going to put their hands on other human beings. So to have the skill set of being able to effectively put your hands on another person and place them safely into custody and minimize injury, the more skill that you have, the better you're equipped you're going to be able to do your job, no matter what it is. But law enforcement officers, when they are dealing with those situations on the road, and you have to be confident in yourself, and you have to feel like that you can handle any situation that you come up on. But just like anything, if you don't have the physical training, you've never been trained to go hands-on with another person, then you're not going to be equipped to do it, just as I wasn't when I was with probation. And so what happens, though, and this is just my theory on why more don't train, is that to accept the fact that you are not able to defend yourself, and accept the fact that you are not able to effectively handle a one-on-one situation that goes combative with a suspect on the road. So to step away from your job and come to a martial arts academy and go, you know what? I need to learn how to protect myself and do my job more effectively at the police department. You basically are opening yourself up to the vulnerability of going, you know what?
There's that word again.
Right, that I don't know how to protect myself, and I don't know how to effectively control a subject that's willfully fighting back and be comfortable doing it one-on-one, me and just that other person. And so when you come in to a martial arts academy and you say that and you open yourself up to that, you're letting another person into the world where you've been closed off, and you're saying, oh, I'm okay, I know what I'm doing. And now you tell this instructor, hey, I want to learn how to I want to learn how to do martial arts. I want to learn how to defend myself. And then the part that really, and it affected me when I was a probation officer, what happens is you go on that mat the first time, and as a grown man or as a grown woman in a law enforcement capacity job, and you go on the mat and you're with a 13 or 14-year-old kid, and you spar with them as your skill level increases, and this 13 or 14-year-old kid that's been training for the last 6 or 7 years of their life is able to, you may outweigh about 100 pounds and can bench press twice as much weight, and this student's able to effectively handle you and submit you, and it's a very humbling experience and can be almost debilitating to the fact that when you walk out of there,
the next day you were talking about, right?
And the next day you have to go out on the road and you remember. And going back to the vulnerable word, now I go back out on the road the next day to do my job, and now all that comes back to me. Wow, I was on the mats with a person that was half my size that's 13 years old. And now I'm out here and I'm going to be going one-on-one by myself without backup. And it's
It's a lot of emotion.
Very tough mentally to accept the fact that you're vulnerable.
Because I'll tell you how powerful it is. I'm sitting here thinking, I want to see this 13-year-old because I'm going to take him out. Like, you think he can take me? I want to take him right now.
Right.
I mean, I feel that. I'm going to be honest with you. I feel
yeah, sure.
You know
and everybody
what I mean?
does. Oh,
and if I'm a police officer, it's my job to have control this environment. And if you're right, if I feel like I can't, that's whoa.
It is. It can be very overwhelming because and this happens to just people that come in general. Craig can tell you. You just come in as you're coming as an adult student, and suddenly you're in there with a younger person or a female, and they are
beast
just
of a middle schooler.
Oh yeah, and you're like, I know how to handle myself. I can do this, and then you go in there and you are broken down, where it's just like, wow, not where you're physically hurt, but up here mentally because you realize then that you have just bought into your own hype. Your own ego has just gotten so far out of control that, and until somebody shows you, and I think that's why so many people don't train. I think that's why so many law enforcement officers don't train, is because to accept the fact that we all like to feel like we know how to defend ourselves, and we all like to feel like we know how to.
It's a helpless feeling to think otherwise.
Oh, sure it is. It is a very helpless feeling. And so when you take that step and lower yourself or humble yourself and go, hey, teach me how to do this, that's a big step. But yeah, it's you see it a lot.
How old's Ryan, Shawn?
He had a birthday today.
That's right.
So
is
I
he
think
12?
he turned 13.
He's 13? Yeah, come on in. We'll introduce you to Ryan.
No,
right.
Monday night. None of that, man.
Right. But
my arm was broke. I don't want to break my arm again. I'm scared.
Ryan or Chase, you know.
Right. It is. And you're just like,
it's crazy. Look at this guy. He's laughing. He's like lining me up to get my butt kicked over here.
It is. But but it also turns in, and luckily that's the culture of a good martial arts academy, is that everybody's there to help you grow, and everybody's
there's a togetherness, right? It's a powerful social reality.
It is, because just like that's why law enforcement is so tight and military people are so tight, is those are your brothers, that they only know you are the only other one that knows the experience that they're going through, the blood, the sweat, the tears, the emotional roller coaster when you cried, when you got beat, or when you got had a bad day in training.
Let me jump in and make a really important point there for people that are knowing police officers or military people or whatnot that I've been successful at in my therapy office, seeing it multiple times. That is a true feeling that people have that's very common. That is also a lie that we perpetuate in our own mind. Because that person who was in this military engagement at this encampment in whatever situation has been very successful in sharing with me the intimate details of the way they're feeling about that. And though I wasn't there, though I am not even a military professional or have the experience, I've been able to connect with them. And so you, Miss Police Officer out there, or you, Mr. Police Officer out there, know that you can accomplish, as you have written here, Shawn, break down those barriers, that other people can absolutely connect with you on that and share that burden together. That's very, very important to know, and very, very possible, I would say.
Oh, I not being a therapist, I completely agree. And I think that's what bonds these people together, is you're going through this experience, this training experience together. And so you experience the same joys and the same cycles of the training, the downs, the ups, and you talk to each other, and you know what it takes to get through the training and to get through the grind, I call it, of martial arts training. And so you depend on each other. I would say that not only am I a therapist, but all the training partners for each other are each other therapists. And I was close to one of my instructors that got killed in a car wreck, and I never realized it until I started taking on the role, more and more of a role as a coach and a competitive team. And I miss those interactions that I had with him. I never realized how much he was therapy sessioning me about my training, and me telling him, the last 20 times I've ridden home from class at 9 o'clock at night, I said I was quitting and never come back. And then I come back the next day. And he was working me through all that the whole time. And so I catch myself at times, because I will take on so much of the emotions of my students, that I will think, man, I just wish I had a day to sit and talk with my professor that I used to have, because I missed that talk, and I never realized how therapeutic and how I need to get that out about what's going on with me now as far as my training and where I'm at. I can go, hey, this is what's going on at my academy now, and now I'm at this level, and help guide me through this level, because I don't have you. That's one of the things that happens as you progress in rank and you progress in rank. Eventually you go out on your own and you're running your own thing. And so now you kind of will break away from your instructors or whatever to run your own program. And if you're not around them anymore, then you don't have that outlet.
Right.
To be able to discuss what's going on with you and your training. And so
it's important to execute in your own self. Yeah. If I call you friend, you're also going to know about how I'm feeling about things. And I value that so much, because you can't, that stuff starts staying in your own head and you're kind of screwed. Dude, we have got to summarize up here.
Yeah. I just want to make a point real quick though about that whole thing. So, like the people in the jiu-jitsu community, I mean, I think probably some of my people I train with have become some of my best friends. And Shawn's right. There's like a community there, and everybody's going through that shared experience, and they're helping everybody out, and that kind of there's that kind of chemistry there among the people. And it's interesting because I mentioned on the last show that we took a trip up to Chicago in June. I think, was it June, Shawn? To train at Carlson School. And even though we didn't know those people personally, they kind of pulled us into their little community and treated us like we were one of their own. And it was the same kind of feeling that I got training here in Gastonia, training in Chicago, but just not knowing those guys on
experience.
the group
built.
Yeah, absolutely it was. It was absolutely a similar
I would
kind
submit to you, any police officer can go to another city and probably another country and feel the same sort of camaraderie. Is that a true statement? Yeah,
very much so. I agree with that.
Groups of people are very powerful. Okay, unfortunately we do have to shut this down in some way. Shawn, I'll give you the first stab at it. And by the way, I started a tradition in my brain. Maybe it's stupid and corny, but I think it's cool because when somebody comes on the show and shares like you have, I mean, that's not an easy thing to do. It's weird. I mean, you do public speaking, but even when you're comfortable and do that, it's right. A weird thing to come on and share your own thoughts and do that. So I give people a high five here in a little bit, loud enough that people are going to see if you're comfortable with that. Because I really am appreciative of you spending your time to share your expertise and knowledge on such important topics. So anything we missed, how do you want to summarize? What are you thinking, Greggy, too?
No, I probably, to me, the biggest thing that I would say in summary about everything is being able to reach out, whether it's being able to reach out by way of doing martial arts training and getting on a mat and the vulnerability that you're going to go through there, or whether it's reaching out to a friend or a therapist or whatever it is that's going to help you grow as a person. For one of the thing that helped me grow as a person just happened to be martial arts, and the way that I got into it was through law enforcement, something that I would have never dreamed the way that things turned out and how I ended up where I did. But I think that it's so important to have something positive in your life that's going to keep you centered and focused, and good people around you and good friends that you can talk to. And I just think there's so much that's out there and available now, whether it be on a physical end or whether it be on the mental health end, that is out there and available, and there's no reason not to take advantage of all of it. And I think the mental health or the mental aspects of martial arts. There's so much entwined between martial arts and the mental aspects of it that an average person would never look at and go, hey, I'm going to start martial arts because I want to grow with my mental health. And that's one of the biggest benefits that I preach to people all the time. And it's one of the things that people will say to me, you're always so relaxed. You always seem so even-tempered and even-keeled. And so...
Were you always that way?
No, I probably, I've always, I think, been fairly even-tempered, but probably not so much
So
growing up too. Right. I definitely, it changed my temperament a good bit. I had the typical Irish temper, I would say, from a long line of Irish. So I definitely think that it changed my temperament and how I deal with situations and stressful people and stressful situations. So,
well, let me thank you again for
thank
spending
you.
some time with us. You can sum us up and do your thing, but I just wanted to, if you're willing, I'd like to give you that high five.
Oh, sure.
Because I appreciate what you're doing with people, and I'm not even going to say our kids, but just with people. And talking to you, it's clear that you're really dialed in and care about people and doing a lot of good for helping. And I appreciate that.
Thanks for having
What are you thinking, Craig? And
There's not much I can add to that. I think that was a good summary.
All right. Well, then get us out of here, and I have no idea where we're going next, though. But
We're going to get unstuck, right?
oh, that's right. I do know. Yes, I apologize
got that
for
one
skipping
left.
it and never getting back. Yeah, good job.
Yeah. ThroughItTherapistEyes.com, folks. You can find links to our Facebook and our Instagram. Sign up for our email list. If you're enjoying the show, we would appreciate you telling your friends.
And how do they find Shawn?
How do they find Shawn? McGinnis Academy of Martial Arts.com. McGinnis Academy of Martial Arts on Facebook. He's also got a personal Instagram and a Academy Instagram. You can find us out there, or if you're in town, come by and try out a class. As far as the podcast goes, if I didn't say it, if you'd leave us a 5-star and subscribe, it would be awesome. And I don't think I left anything out, did I?
Thanks, Craig. I appreciate it, bro.
You got it.
Thank you, guys.